Welcome to the voices of transparency and excellence. We're not pivoting. The world is spinning like a top. Let's stop, figure things out, get some answers. Come with us on this ride. Warm regards, Rick and Judi.
Welcome to our podcast series where we address crucial topics impacting our campus and community. I'm Judi Clarke, and I'm here with...
I'm Rick Gatteau, and in today's episode, we are continuing the discussion regarding the impacts of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that was passed by Congress and signed into law by President Trump on July 4th of this year. And we are so pleased to be joined by Juan Conesa, professor and co-chair of the Department of Economics here at Stony Brook University. Juan Carlos, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. Well, it's been, as I mentioned, about 3 months since President Trump signed into law the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Can you share for our listeners, give us a basic understanding of the bill and some of its implications?
Well, how many hours do we have? It's certainly a big bill. You know, it has hundreds of provisions, of different provisions. But I guess I can summarize the basic points, and then we can elaborate on them if you want to. The first one I would highlight is the extension of the tax cuts of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Those tax cuts were set to expire by the end of 2025, and those are getting extended, I imagine, permanently. The second one is a significant cut expenses in Medicaid. Medicaid, as you probably all know, is the public healthcare provision for working age, poor, or medically needy. And I think they are estimating around a 12% cut to that. It's quite significant. Then it also introduces work requirements for SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Program. It's basically what used to be called food stamps. So individuals, in order to qualify for it, are going to be required to work a minimum of 80 hours per month. That's also a significant cut there. Then it increases the state and local tax deduction in the income tax schedule. It goes from $10,000 to $40,000 for 5 years, and then it's supposed to go back to $10,000. I think those are the main ones. Then there are some things that are kind of almost anecdotic, like the no tax on tips, or a significant tax deduction for overtime work. But those are, in terms of dollars, are much less important. There's also more budget for defense, and there's in particular a huge increase in the budget for ICE, and it eliminates some tax cuts for electric vehicles and things like that from the Biden era. I think that summarizes the main things, the big things.
So it's interesting in these cuts and what is being sustained and what is being eliminated or reduced. How do you think, and what preparatory things should be happening right now? Because when you think about a 12% increase or a reduction in Medicaid, Medicare, or these work requirements for the SNAP benefits, when maybe people aren't workforce ready, what should be happening right now? And what's the government's responsibility?
Medicaid we're talking about 70 million people, okay? That's a hell of a lot of people. Yeah. 70 million people get health care through Medicaid. So any reduction to that has automatically a lot of implications for the well-being of individuals. The same happens with SNAP. I mean, many people qualify for SNAP because they cannot work, and if you introduce work requirements, then basically you're gonna be. It's gonna be complicated for a lot of people, for a lot of middle-aged people. It's gonna be difficult to get healthcare, difficult to put food on the table. It can be pretty brutal.
Do you have a sense that the members of Congress who voted for this bill, that they understand the implications of that, or particularly in the SNAP and Medicaid arena, what are the likely outcomes in terms of short and long term that may not even be realized at the time of the vote was taken?
The first thing I have to say, I come originally from Spain, so these mega bills with hundreds of provisions where you have to vote yes or no on 100 different items. I just don't understand why we conduct politics in such a way. It's confusing to me. Why did they vote for it? Well, I guess the claim on those who prepared the bill is that there is a certain degree of abuse of these welfare programs. That has to be the claim. I mean, ironically enough, if you look at the geographical distribution of people who rely on Medicaid, you're going to be pointing to many areas where Trump got a lot more votes than the opposite party.
And we had, in our earlier podcast, Judi and I, our previous guest, talked a bit about even in rural hospitals, and particularly where high number of Medicaid patients seek care, that there will certainly be some implications around the ability for rural hospitals to sustain themselves, given the for not to get reimbursements, for example. So that's why we're asking the question about whether there are longer term implications that maybe folks who voted for it didn't realize. But as you said, in the United States, it's interesting how the sausage gets made.
Yep.
And it seems that even for here on Long Island, there was a lot of advocacy, for example, for the salt increase.
Right.
But it seemed that some of our legislators voted for that and then had to give up something in return. Is that your sense of how bills become laws, and that there's this art of compromise in the negotiation process?
Yeah, I guess it's an exchange of coins. I give you this, and then you take out that. It's probably a long and complicated bargaining process that I don't fully understand. In the end, if you look at the Congressional Budget Office, which is politically neutral, they are estimating that the bill is going to generate an additional $3 trillion in government debt. It's substantial. It's not huge, given that we already have 37 trillion, but it is not nothing. I mean, it's a huge increase in deficits and in debt.
So let's talk about that. So if you think about these cost savings, because you think there's waste, inefficiencies, and so on, what, in your opinion, politically, do you think a reinvestment of that $3 trillion would be?
If you look at all of the forecasts, all of the projections of expenditure and fiscal revenues, the situation is really scary. I mean, we have a population is aging, Medicare needs are going to be increasing, Medicaid needs are going to be increasing, taxes are pretty much, going down across the board. So we are nowadays, this year, we are not in a recession. We are not by any means, we don't have high unemployment rates. So things are going relatively well.
Yes.
And still we have a 6% deficit as a share of GDP. This is huge. This ought not to happen. You should be having, fiscal deficits. Of course, when you are in a recession, of course, naturally, you're going to have fiscal deficits. But having these large fiscal deficits in normal times, this is something that is unsustainable. The Congressional Budget Office I was referring to before It's the projections mean something needs to be done,
Right.
either on the revenue side or on the expenditure side, or both. Something needs to be done, and I don't see this bill contributing in any way. Exactly the opposite. Yes, they are. Yes.
And is there anything with the bill in the form it was passed that you like, that you think has a benefit to the American public?
If you look at the tax code, the income tax code specifically, it has thousands and thousands of pages. Okay? That's nirvana for lawyers. One thing that was good of the Tax Cut Act is that it streamlined and simplified the tax code quite significantly. That you can do reducing taxes or not reducing taxes. But the simplification in itself, that I viewed that at the moment, and I still do, as a good thing. We should be moving in that direction. So I think that's good. Then, for example, it raises the debt ceiling. I mean, all the mess we are seeing ourselves now with the shutdown is because of the debt ceiling. No country in the world has a debt ceiling that they stamp upon every 12 months. And then all of a sudden they have to shut down the government and everything. It's absurd. So I think increasing the debt ceiling it's not necessarily a bad thing. Mm-hmm. And among the hundreds of things, maybe we can find something else. I'm happy for the state and local tax deduction. I like paying less taxes. We all do.
Yes.
But I wouldn't advise for it
Right.
necessarily with a 6% deficit.
Yes.
Can you talk a bit about the intersection of trade and tariffs and a lot of the focus on trying to bring manufacturing back in the United States, how that's connecting to some of the bill itself?
I don't think it's connected to the bill at all. I mean, I haven't read the entirety of the bill, and I haven't seen a lot there related to tariffs. Now, what happens when you set tariffs? Typically, other countries are going to retaliate. And what that means is that the situation can easily slide into a tariff war. And nobody wins tariff wars. The U.S. is a big country and with large deficits, so somehow is less negatively affected than other countries, but that doesn't mean it's a win for anybody. Trade is the source of all prosperity. So the more barriers you put to it, the more prosperity you're destroying. It's never a good idea, and it's also alienating our traditional allies. Canadians are not happy, Mexicans are not happy, Europeans are not happy.
In the context of what you've shared, what do you think our new relationship is with Canada and Mexico?
I have friends in Canada. I have plenty of friends. They are academics. University of Toronto, for example, is doing quite a lot of efforts in attracting talent from the U.S., and they are doing that quite successfully, actually. I guess they're stuck with the United States of America forever, so there's nowhere else to go. I mean, they all live like within a few miles from the border. I mean, so they're stuck with us. But it is true that there is some hard feelings there, and they are not looking at the U.S. as friendly as they used to. I'm hoping that's temporary.
It'll be interesting to see how those relationships are brokered to a more positive, seeing within a positive frame, but they certainly are strained right now, aren't they?
Yes.
And kind of the other part of my question was around just manufacturing in the United States, around that becoming a much greater push, because I think over my lifetime, more of the manufacturing has gone to other countries around the world. I know there's been an emphasis on trying to bring that into U.S., but there are issues around labor costs associated with that. I'm just wondering if you could share from your perspective.
Yeah. The studies I've read quantifying the impact of trade for manufacturing work is very, very small. The impact is very small. It's the machines, it's the robots. It's not if companies couldn't, buy cheap stuff from countries that have cheap labor, then they would be manufacturing that stuff with robots. I don't think you can bring back the good old times of large manufacturing jobs. This is not going to happen. And that's whether you have tariffs or not, that's those times are not coming back. Nowadays, if you go to a production plant, what you see are robots and engineers, not thousands and thousands of unskilled labor to do the menial tasks. This is not happening. This is not coming back. All of the research that I've seen points in that direction.
So going in a little different direction, I understand you have a daughter who's in high school at Ward Melville. Shout out to her. So
hello, Carlota.
Carlota, hello. So as you're thinking about college for her, in this bill, there's been some representations of capping student loans and parent loans and so on. So speak from your perspective, but also speak to the audience, the impact on students' ability to get undergrad degrees as well as graduate degrees, the cost.
Yeah, that's actually a question for you too. You probably know better than I do. I mean, the point, I honestly, I don't understand the notion that you're going to put a cap on student loans. I mean, if maybe maybe you won't be able to get them from federal funding, but you might still be able to get it from somewhere else. Maybe the universities themselves will provide some of that funding.
What does that feel like as a parent? And what do you think your daughter's thinking of?
I don't know. I think she's not thinking of college yet.
Okay.
She just started Ward Melville.
She's
but educating your youth is always a fantastic investment.
Yes.
It's one of the investments that generates the highest rate of return, economically speaking. And there are other benefits of educating your youth. But I have a hard time understanding what the provisions in this bill are going to do for educational opportunities. Maybe they'll limit the educational opportunities of some people, but because I fail to think or imagine what the reaction to that is going to be from the part of universities themselves, etc., or parents. I mean, maybe if my daughter cannot get as much of a loan as she needs, maybe I'm going to have to do some overtime and tax overtime according to the tax deduction, and compensate for that, or I don't know.
It's tough. It is tough.
I mean, and I think one of my recollection, one of the provisions talked about the cap being about $200,000.
That's right.
And particularly for professional schools. And I think one of the questions that's been raised about, will that limit, for example, the diversity of applicants to our professional schools, knowing that we as a society want doctors, for example, who are reflective of the population they're serving. And will it, again, potentially limit, and the fact is too, and you mentioned before about aging Americans and needing, greater health care, will it have a long-term ramification in not having the number of physicians, for example, or medical personnel we need because they weren't willing to take out or able to take out the loans, in fact.
No, exactly. I mean, if they cannot access the funds they need to become professionals, and on top of that, we put limitations on people from overseas, talent from overseas coming over to become physicians and engineers, and that we need. largest economy in the world needs all the talent they can get. So that it's not looking good. It's not. It's going in the wrong direction, in my opinion.
Which is odd because we're talking about bringing the jobs back and increasing the workforce and having these work expectations, and you want high-skilled workforce. And yet it's the education that allows individuals to be the solution, particularly when you're talking about robotics. Well, somebody needs high skill to actually service those robots. So it's not just walking in and with a screwdriver. It's being able to calibrate these robots. And so it's just interesting to think about how decisions are being justified in people's head, that we need a sophisticated, high-skilled workforce broadly.
Yes.
And yet we're limiting the opportunity for people to get those skills.
Yes.
So another question is kind of our relationship with other countries. And Rick touched a little bit on the tariffs. But respective to the bill, how is that affecting our relationship with other countries? And do you think there's a broader scale perspective that we should be taking in consideration right now or paying attention to?
I don't think the bill is really, really important. I mean, there's a lot of issues going on in the world scene. It's the only justification you could find for tariffs or a tariff war is geopolitical considerations. You say, okay, you don't want countries to take advantage of the technology they can access to by trading with the US and so on and so forth. But what that would mean is that if you're going to act on tariffs and trade restrictions as a geopolitical tool, then what you should be doing is putting lots of tariffs on certain countries that you consider not to be your allies,
right,
and reducing the tariffs on those who are your traditional allies and the ones you want to increase your collaboration with. But we're not doing that. We are alienating our traditional allies, and that's not good.
Can I go back to the part of the bill that I don't think you mentioned was around and I think it's $1,000 either a tax credit from the federal government for any children born between 2020 and 2028. I'm just wondering, any insight on why that was added to the bill and what the intent or goal of that provision is?
I mean, almost the entire world, with the only exception of sub-Saharan Africa, has drop in fertility rates. People stop having children, and that has huge economic consequences for the future. A provision of giving a few $100 or a few $1,000 for people who have children is not going to change that. These kind of policies have been tried before, especially in Europe, for example, and they typically don't have a significant impact. I mean, people are not having children because the role of women in the labor market, in the economy, all of that is changing drastically, and it's a good thing. I mean, I personally only have one child. It was me and my wife's decision. So, if I chose that, it's because it's the best thing for us. So a few extra dollars are not going to make a big difference on that, I think.
What I find is interesting, speaking of children, that you would reduce SNAP, and which was the old WIC, and that's what provided, safe and nutritional food and all the things that are needed for the wealth and health and growth of disadvantaged families, particularly for women and for children. And so it just seems counterintuitive that there'd be an incentive on, increasing the number of births and yet we don't support the children after they're here. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I mean all the studies you can read point that well-fed, healthy children learn at twice the speed. I mean, so again, talking about the skills of the labor force, the early childhood investment, for example, is like the highest return on any investment you can think of. So, of course, for children to take advantage of that, being healthy and well-fed is essential. So that those provisions might backfire in our investment for the future. Yeah.
So I'm curious. I read a bit about your bio. I know you mentioned your background being from Spain, and I saw that you were at the University of Barcelona. I'm curious, as you look at and compare the United States system of how operate in terms of economic policy compared to Spain. I'm just curious, what are the biggest distinctions you see, and what's been the biggest surprise to you as you've studied American economic policy?
Yeah, I mean, traditionally, Europe is a lot more interventionist. There's a lot more regulation, and sometimes regulation that is, a big barrier to economic growth. I mean, in particular, for example, you wouldn't believe how many barriers there are inside the European Union to trade that are not, tariffs or specific barriers to trade. It's just, simple regulations of how you build this, how you build that, and so on. So it's a lot more regulated, and that generates lack of dynamism. The U.S. is a lot more dynamic economy than any of the European countries, with one exception, which is Scandinavian countries that went through a big crisis in the early 90s and then decided to reform and somehow managed to find an equilibrium between dynamism and the welfare state. What you have in Europe is you have, of course, a lot more taxes than in the U.S. People complain in the U.S. that they pay a lot of taxes. Well, go to Europe. See, you pay a lot more taxes, and you have a much more generous safety net, and but that comes at the expense of economic dynamism.
Well, maybe we can learn something from those Scandinavia countries that we could use as best practices to integrate into our process.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, Juan Carlos, we just wanted to thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise with us today.
Absolutely. We hope our listeners find these discussions informative and empowering as we navigate these times together. Thank you again to our guest, Juan Carlos, for his valuable contributions.
And join us again next week for an episode where we'll dive into the culture of Congress. For now, I'm Rick Gatteau.
And I'm Judi Brown Clarke, and thank you for tuning in.